Have you ever noticed that anxiety doesn't always show up when something is actually wrong? Sometimes it arrives on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Sometimes it's there while you're lying in bed, even though nothing bad happened that day. Your heart feels a little faster. Your mind starts running through conversations that haven't happened yet, or replaying ones that ended hours ago. Most people assume anxiety means something is wrong with them, that they're overthinking, too sensitive, not mentally strong enough. But after spending years reading about psychology, neuroscience, and the quiet wisdom behind many Japanese traditions, I've started to see it differently. What if anxiety isn't always a problem to solve? What if, sometimes, it's simply a nervous system that has forgotten how to recognize safety? Think about modern life for a moment. We wake up to notifications. We rush through work. We compare ourselves to strangers online. Even after work ends, our minds don't. We don't really transition into rest anymore. We just switch from one screen to another. And over time, the brain begins to treat constant alertness as normal. That's why telling yourself to just relax almost never works. Because you can't argue a nervous system into feeling safe. It has to experience safety. And that's where I think Japan has something quietly remarkable to teach us. Not because the Japanese never feel anxious, they do, but over generations, they've developed simple, daily rituals that gently guide the body back toward calm instead of forcing the mind to fight itself. Some of these habits come directly from Japanese culture. Others are supported by modern neuroscience, but reflect the same philosophy. None of them require changing your entire life. Most take only a few minutes. Yet together, they can completely change the way your body responds to stress. And by the end of this video, you'll understand something that changed the way I think about anxiety forever. You'll understand why some anxious thoughts cannot be solved by thinking, because many of them were never created by thinking in the first place. Here's something I wish someone had told me years ago. Most people aren't becoming more anxious because they're weaker than previous generations. In many ways, we're asking our nervous systems to do something they've never had to do before. Stay alert all day, every day. Think about what a normal day looks like now. Before your feet even touch the floor in the morning, your phone is already asking for your attention. Emails, news, messages, notifications, someone's vacation, someone else's success, someone's opinion. Before you've even had breakfast, your brain has already processed more information than people once encountered in an entire morning. And it doesn't stop there. Work ends, but work doesn't really end. We close the laptop, then pick up the phone. We leave the office, but mentally, we're still there. Our bodies are sitting on the couch. Our minds are still answering emails, still replaying meetings, still preparing for tomorrow. Somewhere along the way, we stopped creating endings. There used to be clear transitions. People walked home, they changed clothes, they shared dinner with family. The day had a rhythm. Now one activity simply melts into the next. And the nervous system never receives one simple message. The danger is over. Instead, it stays quietly prepared, just in case something else happens. Another notification, another problem, another decision, another comparison. Over time, this constant state of readiness starts to feel normal. We call it being busy, being productive, being connected. But underneath all of that, many of us are simply exhausted. Not because we're doing too much physically, because our nervous systems rarely get permission to stop scanning for the next thing. And this is where the Japanese approach feels so different. Instead of asking, how can I become mentally stronger? It often begins with a much quieter question. How can I help my body remember that it's safe? Because sometimes lasting calm doesn't begin with changing your thoughts. It begins with changing the rhythm of your life. This is where I think one of the biggest cultural differences begins. When many of us feel anxious, our first instinct is to ask, how do I make this feeling go away? We search for techniques. We look for quick fixes. We try to control our thoughts. And when that doesn't work, we often blame ourselves. But in Japan, there has long been a quieter way of looking at emotional well-being. Instead of asking, how do I stop anxiety? The question is often closer to, how do I create the conditions where calm can naturally appear? At first, that may sound like a small difference, but it changes everything. Because calm isn't something you force, it's something you make room for. Think about a garden for a moment. You can't pull on a flower and make it bloom faster. You can't demand that a tree grow overnight. What you can do is care for the soil, water it, protect it, give it enough sunlight, and then you trust the process. In many ways, the Japanese approach to inner peace follows the same logic. Instead of trying to control every anxious thought, it focuses on shaping the environment around the mind, the rhythm of the day, the spaces between activities, the rituals that gently tell the body, you can rest now. I think that's why so many Japanese traditions seem surprisingly simple. Making tea, walking quietly through a garden, soaking in a warm bath, opening the windows in the morning. None of these things eliminate anxiety by themselves, but together, they create an environment where calm has a chance to grow. And I think that's one of the most beautiful ideas hidden inside Japanese culture. Calm is treated less like an emotion you have to chase, and more like an environment you quietly learn to create. Once I understood that, I stopped asking, how do I stop feeling anxious? And I started asking a different question. What kind of life teaches my nervous system that it's safe? Everything you're about to hear in the rest of this video grows from that single idea. The next 9 habits aren't really about fighting anxiety. They're about creating the conditions where peace no longer has to fight so hard to be found. If there's one idea I wish more people understood, it's this. Your body almost always reacts before your mind understands why. Think about the last time you felt suddenly anxious. Your heart probably sped up first. Your shoulders became tense. Your breathing grew shorter. Only then did your mind begin searching for an explanation. Maybe it's tomorrow's meeting. Maybe it's that text message. Maybe it's something you forgot to do. The mind is incredibly good at telling stories. When the body feels danger, the mind wants to explain it. But very often, the story isn't the cause, it's the consequence. That's why trying to think your way out of anxiety can feel so frustrating. You're trying to quiet the storyteller while the alarm is still ringing downstairs. The body speaks first. The mind simply translates. And that means something incredibly hopeful. If the body can influence the mind, then the body can also help calm the mind. One of the fastest ways to do that is through something called the physiological sigh. It takes less than 15 seconds. Breathe in slowly through your nose. Before you breathe out, take 1 small second inhale, just a gentle sip of air, then let everything go with 1 long, slow exhale. That's it. Simple, but surprisingly powerful. Researchers have found that this breathing pattern helps the body shift away from its stress response more quickly than many people expect. Not because you're forcing yourself to feel calm, but because you're giving your nervous system new information. You're quietly telling it, we're safe enough to slow down now. Try it the next time you notice yourself spiraling, not after you've spent 20 minutes worrying. The very first moment you notice your breathing becoming shallow. Sometimes, the smallest interruption is enough to stop anxiety from gathering momentum. And once the body begins to settle, the mind often follows. Because calm doesn't always begin with better thoughts. Sometimes it begins with a better breath. If breathing teaches the body how to slow down, then Ofuro, the Japanese bathing ritual, teaches the body something just as important. It teaches the body when the day is over. To many people outside Japan, it may look like nothing more than taking a warm bath. But traditionally, Ofuro has never been only about getting clean. In fact, most people shower before they even step into the bath. The bath isn't for washing, it's for arriving, for letting the body fully realize that work is finished, that responsibilities can wait, and that this moment belongs to rest. I think that's something many of us have quietly lost. Our ancestors had natural transition rituals. They walked home from work, they changed into comfortable clothes, they sat down for dinner. As the sun went down, life naturally slowed with it. The body understood those signals. It knew when it was time to work and when it was finally safe to rest. Today, those boundaries have almost disappeared. We answer one last email while eating dinner. We scroll through social media while watching television. We lie in bed, still thinking about tomorrow's to-do list. The day never really ends. It just fades into the next one. And if the day never truly ends, why would the nervous system believe it's safe to relax? That's why rituals matter. Not because they magically remove stress, but because they create a clear transition. They tell the brain, you don't have to stay on guard anymore. Maybe for you, that ritual is a warm bath. Maybe it's making a cup of tea, turning off your phone, changing into comfortable clothes, or sitting quietly for 10 minutes before bed. The ritual itself isn't the point. The message is, every evening, you're giving your nervous system permission to cross an invisible bridge, from doing to simply being. And sometimes, that quiet transition is exactly what the body has been waiting for all day. If there's one habit that's become almost impossible in today's world, it's learning how to stop comparing ourselves to everyone else. We don't even realize how often we do it. Someone gets promoted, someone buys a new house, someone posts pictures from a vacation, someone launches a business, someone seems happier, healthier, more successful, and without meaning to, we quietly begin measuring our own lives against theirs. Social media has made this even harder because we're no longer comparing ourselves to people. We're comparing our ordinary, everyday lives to someone else's carefully edited highlight reel. We see their best moments, their biggest achievements, their happiest photos, but we compare them to our hardest days, our private struggles, our moments of self-doubt. No wonder so many people walk away feeling like they're falling behind. The Japanese have a beautiful word for this, Ōbaitori. It comes from 4 different trees that bloom in spring: the cherry blossom, the plum blossom, the peach blossom, and the apricot blossom. Each one flowers in its own time. None of them tries to bloom earlier. None of them feels late. None of them looks at another tree and thinks, I should be where they are. Because each tree follows its own nature, its own season, its own rhythm. Maybe that's something we've forgotten. Life was never meant to be a race where everyone reaches the same finish line at the same moment. We're not living identical stories. We're not growing under identical conditions. We're not carrying identical burdens. So, why do we expect identical timelines? The next time you catch yourself comparing your life to someone else's, pause for just a moment and ask yourself one simple question. Am I comparing seasons or am I comparing flowers? Because a flower blooming in April isn't better than one blooming in May. It's simply blooming when it's meant to. Maybe your season hasn't arrived yet. That doesn't mean you're behind. It simply means you're still growing. One of the quietest lessons Japanese culture offers is this: life is only ever happening right here, right now, not yesterday, not tomorrow, just this moment. There's a beautiful Japanese expression for this, Ichigo Ichie. It roughly means, this moment exists only once. No conversation will ever happen in exactly the same way again. No sunset will ever look exactly the same. Even this ordinary day will never return. At first, it sounds poetic, but it also points to something surprisingly practical, because anxiety has a habit of pulling our attention away from the present. It asks us to replay yesterday, to rehearse tomorrow, to imagine conversations that may never happen, to solve problems that don't exist yet. And the more attention it steals, the less of life we actually experience. One thing I've learned is that attention can only truly live in one place at a time. When it keeps traveling into the past or racing into the future, the body stays here, but the mind doesn't. Presence asks attention to stay. Anxiety asks it to leave. That's why even the smallest moments of genuine presence can feel surprisingly healing. Not because they erase your problems, but because, for a little while, your mind finally comes home. One of the simplest ways the Japanese encourage this is through walking. Not walking to burn calories, not walking while checking emails, not walking while listening to 5 different podcasts, just walking. There is something fascinating about the way nature holds our attention. It doesn't demand anything from us. A tree doesn't ask to be admired. A river isn't trying to entertain us. The sound of birds, leaves moving in the wind, sunlight filtering through branches. Our attention naturally settles there. Psychologists sometimes call this soft fascination. Nature gently captures our attention without overwhelming it. Unlike social media, which constantly pulls at the mind, nature quietly invites it to rest. Maybe that's why people often say, "I feel better after a walk." Not because every problem disappeared, but because, for a little while, their attention stopped running. And when attention stops running, the nervous system often stops running too. Sometimes, the most peaceful place you'll ever find isn't somewhere new. It's simply the place where your mind finally catches up with your body. Up until now, we've been talking about habits that gently calm the nervous system. But before we move any further, there's one idea that completely changed the way I understand anxiety. For years, I believed anxiety started with my thoughts. I thought, if I could just think differently, I'd finally feel better. Maybe you've believed that too. But what if we've been looking at it backwards? What if anxiety doesn't usually begin with a thought, but with a sensation? A tight chest, a racing heart, a knot in the stomach, shallow breathing. The body notices something first. The mind simply tries to explain it. And because the human brain hates uncertainty, it starts creating stories. Maybe something is wrong. Maybe I forgot something important. Maybe something bad is about to happen. The story feels convincing, not because it's true, but because the body already feels afraid. This creates a cycle that many of us know without ever realizing it. The body feels tension. The mind interprets that tension as danger. The body reacts even more strongly. The mind creates even more fearful thoughts, and around it goes. The longer the loop continues, the more real the anxiety feels. The difficult part is that most people try to break the loop at the very end. They argue with the thoughts. They search for reassurance. They try to convince themselves everything is fine. Sometimes that helps. Often, it doesn't. because the body is still sending the same signal. One practice I've found surprisingly helpful is incredibly simple. Instead of fighting the feeling, but become curious about it. I like to think of it as 3 small steps. Name. Quietly acknowledge what's happening. I'm feeling anxious. I'm noticing fear. Not, I am anxious. Just, I'm noticing anxiety. There's an important difference. One describes who you are. The other describes what you're experiencing. Then, locate. Where do you actually feel it? In your chest? Your throat? Your stomach? Your shoulders? For a few moments, stop chasing the story. Just notice the sensation. Finally, allow. Not because you enjoy it, not because you want it to stay, but because fighting every uncomfortable feeling often teaches the brain that the feeling itself is dangerous. Instead, let it be there. Breathe. Observe it. And remind yourself, this is a feeling, not a prediction. Something interesting often happens. The moment you stop wrestling with the wave, it slowly begins to lose its strength. Not because you defeated it, but because you stopped feeding it. I've come to believe that healing doesn't always begin when anxiety disappears. Sometimes it begins the moment you stop treating every anxious feeling like an emergency. Because your nervous system isn't asking you to win a fight. It's asking one quiet question. Am I safe? And sometimes the kindest answer you can give is simply, yes, I'm here. By now, you may have noticed something. These habits don't really have much in common on the surface. One changes the way you breathe, another changes the way you think, another invites you to walk, or soak in a warm bath, or stop comparing yourself to others. At first, they seem completely unrelated, but underneath them all, they're doing exactly the same thing. They're sending one quiet message to your nervous system. Nothing urgent is happening right now. And that message is more powerful than most people realize. Because your nervous system is always learning. Every experience teaches it something. If your days are filled with constant pressure, constant rushing, constant comparison, your body slowly learns that the world is a place where it always has to stay on guard. Eventually, that state begins to feel normal. But the opposite is also true. Every small moment of genuine safety teaches the nervous system something too. A slow breath, a peaceful walk, a quiet evening, a meaningful conversation, watching the sunrise, hearing birds outside your window, sitting with a cup of tea without reaching for your phone. These moments may seem ordinary, almost too small to matter, but your nervous system is paying attention. It's quietly collecting evidence. Evidence that not every moment requires protection. Not every silence hides danger. Not every unknown future needs to be feared. I like to think of this as building a memory of safety. Most of us become very good at remembering danger. We remember criticism, embarrassment, failure, pain. Our brains are naturally wired to hold on to those experiences because they helped our ancestors survive. But healing asks something different of us. It asks us to become just as familiar with safety, to notice it, to stay with it for a few extra seconds, to let the body fully experience it before rushing to the next task. Little by little, the nervous system begins collecting a different kind of evidence. Not that life is perfect, not that problems disappear, but that moments of peace are real and that they're available more often than we think. Maybe that's the real purpose of these Japanese habits, not to help you escape life, but to help your body remember something it may have forgotten, that safety isn't a rare accident. It can become a place you return to, again and again, until, eventually, it begins to feel like home. By this point, you may have noticed something. We've talked about 9 different habits, but this was never really a list of 9 separate ideas. It's one philosophy, expressed in 9 different ways. Once I realized that, everything suddenly became much simpler. Because every habit you've heard today is trying to do one of only 3 things. The first is calm the body. That's where practices like breathing, walking, and the Japanese bathing ritual come in. They don't ask your mind to think differently. They simply help your body remember what calm feels like. The second is calm your attention. Anxiety is always trying to pull your attention somewhere else, back into yesterday, forward into tomorrow, toward another notification, another worry, another distraction. Practices like Ichigo Ichie, setting aside a small worry window, or simply spending an evening away from screens, all teach your attention the same lesson. Stay here, because this moment is the only place where life is actually happening. And finally, there's something even deeper. Calm your identity. This is where habits like Ōbaitori, naming your emotions, and remembering moments of safety become so powerful. They slowly change the story you tell yourself about who you are. Instead of believing, I'm an anxious person, you begin to see something different. I'm a person experiencing anxiety and learning how to feel safe again. That may sound like a small shift, but sometimes the smallest changes in language create the biggest changes in healing. When you step back and look at all 9 habits together, you realize they were never asking you to become someone new. They were helping you return to someone you've always been, someone whose nervous system wasn't designed to live in constant fear, someone who already knows what peace feels like, even if that memory has become a little buried over time. Maybe that's the real wisdom hidden inside these Japanese practices. They don't promise a life without stress. They don't promise a mind without anxious thoughts. They simply remind us that peace isn't something we chase. It's something we quietly practice until it begins to feel natural again. And once you understand that, these stop being 9 habits. They become one way of living. If there's one thing I hope you take away from this video, it's this. You don't need to become a completely different person to feel more at peace. You don't need a perfect morning routine. You don't need endless discipline. And you certainly don't need to master all 9 habits by tomorrow. Real change rarely happens all at once. It happens quietly, almost invisibly. One small choice, repeated often enough, becomes a new pattern. And eventually, that new pattern becomes a new way of living. Maybe that's what the Japanese have understood for centuries. Peace isn't built through dramatic breakthroughs. It's built through ordinary moments, treated with extraordinary care. A slow breath before you answer the phone, a quiet walk after work, a warm bath before bed, choosing to notice one beautiful moment instead of reaching for another notification. None of those moments seem life-changing on their own, but together, they slowly teach your nervous system something it may have forgotten. I am safe. And one day, without even realizing exactly when it happened, you may notice something surprising. The thoughts are still there sometimes. Life is still uncertain. There are still difficult days, but your body no longer reacts the same way because safety has become familiar. Not because you forced it, because you practiced it. So here's a simple invitation. Don't try all 9 habits tomorrow. Choose just one, the one that felt the most natural, the one your body quietly said yes to. Practice it for the next 7 days. Not forever. Just 7. Give your nervous system one small, consistent reminder each day that it doesn't have to live in survival mode all the time, and then pay attention. not to whether your life becomes perfect, but to whether your body begins feeling just a little lighter, because sometimes healing doesn't arrive all at once. Sometimes it arrives one quiet ritual at a time.